Imagine being the manager who gets this call. The employee on the line doesn't have a fever. They don't have a flat tire. No, they calmly explain that their cat has somehow gotten trapped inside the dashboard of their car. Is this a job for a mechanic or an animal whisperer? You can't even be mad. You're just stuck wondering if the cat is now in charge of the radio presets. 2. An employee once picked up the phone, dialed their boss's number, and used their own voice to explain that they couldn't come into work because they had bitten their tongue so hard they were unable to talk. Just let that sink in for a moment. This isn't just a bad excuse. It's a philosophical paradox that threatens to unravel the very fabric of logic itself. 3. All right, let's be fair for a moment. The bear in my backyard excuse could be real, if you're a park ranger in Yellowstone. But when your employee works at a marketing firm in downtown San Diego, you have to assume that bear is code for a truly epic hangover they're too scared to face. 4. An employee claimed they were violently ill after accidentally eating a can of cat food instead of tuna. So many questions here. Was the can opener on strike? Do you just not look at labels? Is your sense of smell on vacation? It's not just an excuse, it's a cry for help. Or at least for a better stocked pantry. 5. Here's a power move for you. Outsource your attendance liability. One genius told their boss they couldn't come in because a psychic had a vision of a terrible freeway accident if they drove that day. You can't even argue with it. What's the manager supposed to say? Sorry, my tarot cards disagree with your psychic's crystal ball. 6. Forget calling in sick. This person called in with a movie plot. The excuse: I was at a party last night and I woke up in a different city with no idea how I got here. You can practically hear the dramatic trailer music. This isn't an unexcused absence. It's an adventure. A completely fabricated adventure, most likely, but an adventure nonetheless. 7. Some excuses are just sad. Others are a 5-alarm fire of domestic drama that you want absolutely no part of. Case in point, my wife found out I was cheating, so she superglued my work uniform to my body. As a manager, you don't even ask for proof. You just say, take all the time you need and quietly hang up the phone. 8. Sometimes you just witness an excuse so raw it becomes art. One employee called and said, I'm emotionally unavailable for work today. That's it. No illness, no drama, just a gentle, soul-level boundary. You almost want to applaud the honesty and send them a sponsored ad for therapy apps. 9. Behold, the perfect crime of getting a day off. The excuse? I have to be in court to testify against a drug dealer. It's untouchable. It's bulletproof. Any manager who questions this immediately looks like they're siding with the criminal underworld. It's a strategic masterpiece of workplace evasion. Checkmate. 10. And now, for our spiritual segment. An employee stated they couldn't report for duty because their karma was out of alignment with the cubicle's energy field. This is no longer an HR issue. This requires an office exorcist, a team of feng shui masters, and probably a complete structural realignment of the entire building. 11. This next one is a story of ambition and consequence. An employee called in, barely able to speak, claiming they couldn't move because they'd won a local hot dog eating contest the previous night. You have to wonder what the grand prize was, and if it was worth sacrificing their employment for. Priorities, people. 12. A classic case of do-it-yourself gone horribly wrong. I tried to cut my own hair last night, and now I can't be seen in public. This isn't just an excuse, it's a plea for mercy. The manager is now picturing a Picasso-esque haircut that could single-handedly tank company morale just by being visible. 13. Some excuses are just pure, unadulterated chaos. One employee reported that their car was completely covered in a swarm of bees. You can just imagine the conversation. So, you're saying you're besieged? It's the kind of problem that's so bizarre, HR doesn't even have a form for it. 14. You know you've hired an interesting character when their excuse involves a hostile pet. The employee claimed their new parrot had learned a string of incredibly offensive words and would not stop screaming them every time they tried to leave the room. At that point, the boss should just ask to speak to the parrot directly for confirmation. 15. Here's a work of physical comedy. I can't come in today because my refrigerator fell on me. There's no follow-up information, just that simple, brutal statement. How does a refrigerator just fall on someone? Was it plotting this? It sounds less like an accident and more like the opening scene of a Final Destination movie. 16. This excuse feels like the beginning of a sci-fi thriller. My smart garage door won't open and it's holding my car hostage. Suddenly, it's not about being late for work. It's a high-stakes negotiation between man and machine. You half expect the garage to start making demands. 17. One employee had the nerve to call and state, "I superglued my fingers together by accident." The first, most obvious question isn't even about their absence. It's, how in the world did you manage to dial the phone? This is a level of logistical incompetence that is almost impressive. 18. Sometimes simplicity is key to a truly breathtaking excuse. I honestly thought it was Saturday today. No drama, no elaborate lies. Just a complete and total detachment from the space-time continuum. You can't even get mad. You just feel a little sad for them. Maybe send them a calendar for their birthday. 19. Picture this scene. An employee calls out of breath and says a deer just crashed through their living room window and is now thrashing around their house. Is it a lie? Maybe. But the mental image of Bambi's vengeful cousin redecorating the place with hoof marks is so powerful, you almost have to give them the day off out of respect for the sheer cinematic quality. 20. An employee claimed their uniform didn't fit anymore because gravity changed overnight. Not weight gain, not laundry shrinkage. Gravity. The manager didn't argue. If the laws of physics are against you, what chance does HR stand? 21. The blame game can get creative. One person insisted their dog, in a fit of playful mischief, had unplugged their alarm clock overnight. They didn't just blame the dog, they painted a picture of a canine criminal mastermind deliberately plotting to disrupt their owner's career. Looks like somebody's pet is angling for a promotion. 22. This one is a journey of bewildering incompetence. I accidentally got on a plane. It wasn't a bus or the wrong train. A plane. An aircraft that requires a ticket, a security check, and multiple boarding announcements. Where were you even going? And more importantly, can you bring back some souvenirs? 23. Here's an excuse that combines dedication with a strong gag reflex. My false tooth fell out, and I think it's somewhere in the batch of donuts I just made for the office. On one hand, you have to admire their commitment to retrieving their property. On the other hand, nobody is ever eating a donut from that office again. 24. Modern relationships are complicated. So complicated, in fact, that one employee needed the day off because his wife was experiencing a sympathy pregnancy, and he had to stay home to tend to her morning sickness. The level of sheer creativity here is off the charts. You can't make this stuff up, except, of course, they clearly did. 25. Move over bears. The new apex predator of the suburbs is here. An employee claimed they were trapped in their house by an extremely aggressive goose that was guarding their front door. It's the battle of the century, a 9-to-5er versus a feathered demon. My money's on the goose. 26. Imagine getting a call from an employee who sounds compressed. They're not sick, they're physically trapped. Where? Inside the blood pressure machine at the local grocery store. The automatic cuff has apparently decided to hold their arm hostage. As a manager, you're now faced with a decision no business school could prepare you for. Do you call for an ambulance or just ask someone from the produce department to go check on them? 27. This next call didn't start with a greeting, it started with a scream. My hair's on fire! The manager, probably dropping their coffee, is left to wonder two things. First, how are you even making this call right now? And second, was the incident with the hairspray and the decorative candle really worth a half day of paid time off? This isn't an excuse, it's a live-action stunt sequence. 28. Some employees don't just have pets, they have deep, emotional support systems with fins. One worker called in, voice trembling, to report a family tragedy. His pet fish was clinically depressed. He couldn't possibly leave its side. He just floats there, he explained. He won't even look at his little scuba diver figurine. The boss was so stunned, he just said, "Okay, tell him we're all pulling for him." 29. This excuse bypasses human resources and goes straight to the paranormal investigators. The employee's reason for absence? A ghost stole my car keys. They weren't joking. They were dead serious, explaining that the spectral entity was also known for hiding the television remote. You just have to admire the sheer audacity of blaming your tardiness on a Casper-level poltergeist. 30. Forget calling in sick, this person called in from an action movie. They were out of breath, yelling over the sound of wind and tires. "I can't come in, my car just got stolen and I'm chasing it." The manager, impressed, offered support until the employee added a crucial detail: on foot. Suddenly, the image shifts from a high-octane chase to a sad, slow-motion jog down the shoulder of a highway. 31. Here we have a case of extreme, almost weaponized vanity. An employee called in utter hysterics. Why? Their plastic surgeon had botched their nose job, and now they looked exactly like a celebrity they despised. The crisis wasn't about pain or recovery. It was an aesthetic emergency of the highest order. The company probably should have sent a sympathy card, addressed to whoever you are now. 32. Some excuses are less about being sick and more about being a public menace. One employee claimed they had to stay home because their new experimental cologne was attracting swarms of angry hornets. They had effectively weaponized their personal hygiene. You can just picture them, trapped in their bathroom, a walking, talking hornet magnet of poor decisions. 33. A worker claimed they were too mentally unstable to drive because of a rogue traffic cone. Apparently, it looked at them funny and triggered an emotional spiral. You don't even process the logic. You just quietly put them on paid leave before the cone files an HR complaint of its own. 34. This is what happens when you follow directions too literally. An employee called in, slurring their words, explaining they had accidentally become intoxicated on mouthwash. They thought the label said drink instead of rinse. Forget a drug test, this person needs a literacy test. Their breath might be minty fresh, but their career prospects are suddenly looking stale. 35. There's a fine line between a minor inconvenience and a medical emergency, and this employee erased it. They called to report a catastrophic condition. One of their legs had fallen asleep and simply refused to wake up. They spoke as if the limb had developed its own personality and was staging a protest. The manager was left wondering if they should suggest a cup of coffee for the rebellious leg. 36. You know it's going to be a weird day when an employee's excuse involves a farm animal insurrection. "I can't get out of my driveway," the person stated flatly. "There's a cow sitting on the hood of my car." Not near the car. On the car. This isn't just a traffic delay. It's a statement. That cow is the new boss now. 37. The laws of physics can be a cruel boss. One employee called while panting, explaining, "My bowling ball fell out of my trunk and it's rolling down a massive hill. I have to go get it." This paints a picture of a bizarre, low-stakes chase scene with a guy in office attire pursuing a 16-pound sphere on its epic journey to the next zip code. 38. Some people check the weather. This person checks the stars. Their excuse? "Mercury is in retrograde and I don't trust myself near office electronics. The printer has suffered enough. Let them stay home and realign their aura before Outlook crashes again." 39. An employee called their manager, sounding defeated. "My kid flushed my car keys." A classic, believable parenting disaster. But then he added, "And now he's just standing by the toilet, smiling." In that one sentence, the story transformed from a simple accident into the origin story of a tiny, diabolical supervillain. 40. And finally, the ultimate appeal to a higher authority. An employee needed the day off because a fortune cookie they'd opened the night before gave them a direct order: stay home and embrace tranquility. They were just following instructions. You can't argue with ancient cookie wisdom. It's probably in the company handbook somewhere. 41. This isn't just an excuse, it's a culinary horror story. An employee called in, sounding panicked, claiming they couldn't leave the house because their sourdough starter had grown so large overnight it had blocked their front door. They spoke of it less like bread dough and more like a sentient, rapidly expanding organism from a 1950s sci-fi film. You can't fire them. You need to call NASA. 42. Here's a work of art in deflection. An employee stated they were too emotionally fragile to come to work after watching the finale of a reality TV show. Their favorite contestant had been eliminated. The manager, trying to be empathetic, asked which show. The employee replied, "I don't remember the name, but the one with all the yelling." That narrows it down. 43. Some people have bad days. This person had a meteorological event localized entirely in their bathroom. Their excuse: "My toilet exploded." Not clogged, not overflowing, exploded. Like a scene from a Michael Bay movie. You don't ask for a doctor's note for this. You ask for photographic evidence and maybe a structural engineering report. 44. This is what happens when you combine home improvement with a complete lack of foresight. An employee called, whispering, because they had accidentally painted themselves into a corner of their bedroom. Literally. They were now a prisoner of their own questionable interior decorating choices, waiting for the paint to dry. It's a modern-day tale of self-inflicted isolation. 45. Forget a sick day. This is a full-blown existential crisis. An employee informed their boss that they had come to the sudden, profound realization that their entire life might be a simulation. "I just need a day," they explained, "to sit here and poke things to see if they're real." The manager was left wondering if the quarterly earnings report would also turn out to be a hologram. 46. This next one is a beautiful marriage of technology and incompetence. "My Roomba ate my car keys," the employee reported, "and now it's hiding under the couch." The mental image is perfect. A frantic employee on their hands and knees, pleading with a robotic vacuum cleaner to return their property. This isn't an absence, it's a robot uprising in miniature. 47. Sometimes the excuse is so bizarrely specific, it has to be true. Or at least, you want it to be. "I can't come in today because I'm stuck in an elevator with a mariachi band." The manager, speechless for a moment, could only ask, "Are they playing?" The employee sighed, endlessly. Some people get stuck with awkward silence. This person got a private, inescapable concert. 48. A classic tale of man versus nature, with a twist. An employee called to say they were attacked by a squirrel on their way to their car. But this wasn't just any squirrel. According to the employee, this one knew what it was doing. They described it as a coordinated tactical assault. Forget rabies, this sounds like the start of a squirrel-led revolution. 49. Here's one for the conspiracy theorists. An employee claimed they couldn't come to work because they were being followed by a suspicious-looking garden gnome. They insisted it was moving from lawn to lawn, getting closer every time they looked away. At this point, the company has a duty to either call for a wellness check or equip the employee with surveillance gear. 50. An employee called their boss, sounding confused and disoriented. "I woke up this morning," they said, "and I'm wearing someone else's clothes. I have no idea whose they are." This excuse leaves so much to the imagination. Is it the aftermath of a wild party? A sleepwalking incident? Or have they been unknowingly drafted into a witness protection program? 51. The line between pet and accessory can be a dangerous one. One person needed the day off because they were grieving the loss of their Tamagotchi. It wasn't just dead. It had reportedly gone to the great digital beyond. The boss didn't know whether to offer condolences or suggest they just buy a new set of batteries. 52. This excuse sounds like it was written by a committee of lawyers. An employee stated they could not perform their duties due to unforeseen and aggressive flatulence that posed a direct threat to the office's air quality and overall productivity. They weren't just sick, they were declaring themselves a biohazard. You have to respect the formality. 53. Some excuses are just a window into a very, very strange life. "I have to stay home," an employee explained calmly, "because my llama is giving birth." The manager, who didn't even know they had a llama, was left to process the fact that their subordinate was apparently living in a petting zoo. The follow-up question, "Is it a boy or a girl?" was probably not in the training manual. 54. A moment of profound, almost beautiful laziness. An employee called in and simply said, "My bed is too comfortable to leave." No embellishments, no lies. Just a pure, unadulterated admission of defeat in the face of superior comfort. It's not an excuse, it's a surrender. 55. And finally, an excuse that is both a disaster and a potential solution. "I accidentally locked myself out of my house," the employee said, "but the good news is my car keys are also inside." This creates a perfect loop of incompetence. They can't come to work because they're locked out. And they can't solve being locked out because they can't get to their car. It's a flawless, self-contained failure. 56. This next employee wasn't sick. He was a prisoner of his own gear. After an early morning surf, his wetsuit zipper got stuck. Completely. He called his boss from his car, unable to bend or sit properly, sounding like a man trapped in a full-body neoprene sausage. He wasn't just late for the morning meeting. He was now a walking, talking monument to poor life choices. 57. Some good deeds do not go unpunished. An employee, thinking he was heroically rescuing a dead opossum from the road, brought it home to give it a proper burial. The problem? It was just playing possum. He called his manager mid-chaos, with the resurrected creature now treating his kitchen like a furry, nocturnal rave. He wasn't asking for a day off. He was asking for an extraction team. 58. Here's a uniquely 21st century problem. An employee discovered his identity had been stolen, but the thief wasn't racking up credit card debt. No, this ambitious criminal had used the employee's identity to get a high-paying management job at a rival company. He needed the day off not to call the police, but to update his own resume and figure out what synergistic paradigm management even means. 59. The dangers of technology are real. One employee's phone, through a series of unfortunate autocorrects and a misplaced thumb, composed and sent a wildly inappropriate resignation letter to the entire management team. He was now engaged in a frantic, high-stakes battle against his own pocket-sized traitor. His phone didn't just quit for him. It burned the whole bridge down with digital gasoline. 60. Every office has an amateur athlete. This one's sport, however, was competitive bird calling. He called in, whispering hoarsely that he had strained his vocal cords during the regional championships. He didn't just lose his voice, he lost the title to a guy who could perfectly mimic a disgruntled pelican. Some defeats are just too heavy to bring to the office. 61. Timing is everything, and this employee's was cosmically bad. He called in July to report that he was hopelessly entangled in a string of Christmas lights he'd been trying to sort out in his garage. He wasn't injured, just deeply, deeply humiliated and festively ensnared. The mental image alone probably earned him the day. 62. An employee called in claiming a severe allergic reaction. The cause? A new, trendy, all-natural avocado face mask. His face had swollen to the point where, in his own words, he looked less like a person and more like a rejected Muppet. Some spa days, it seems, fight back with a vengeance. 63. This isn't just a family matter, it's a sacred ritual. The employee needed the day off for his family's annual Day of Grievances, a tradition where they all gather to shout about how everyone disappointed them over the past year. The manager, fearing he might somehow be on that list, wisely approved the absence without any further questions. 64. A classic story of overestimating your own agility. A full-grown adult employee decided to relive his youth on a playground swing set, only to get inextricably stuck. He wasn't calling for a day off from work. He was calling from his new life as a permanent cautionary park installation, while a small crowd of children gathered to point and laugh. 65. This one is less paranormal and more just pathetic. The employee claimed he was cursed. He'd bought a lawn flamingo from a garage sale, and now his life was plagued by a series of minor, deeply annoying inconveniences, from sour milk to his Wi-Fi constantly cutting out. This wasn't a job for an exorcist. It was a job for the Geek Squad and a trip to the grocery store. The flamingo, presumably, was enjoying the chaos. 66. Corporate jargon can be dangerous. A memo about embracing change was apparently misinterpreted by one employee who called his boss from the bus station to announce he had cashed in his 401k and was on his way to become a professional street mime. He had to be gently informed that embracing change usually meant adapting to the new printer software, not giving up spoken language entirely. 67. Here, the power dynamic is beautifully inverted. The employee needed the day off to take his dog to an appointment. Not the vet, but a session with its animal therapist to discuss its mounting separation anxiety. In this household, it was crystal clear whose career and mental well-being took priority. 68. The spirit of invention can be a menace to society. An employee had to stay home to conduct delicate diplomatic negotiations with his neighbor. Why? His homemade potato cannon had worked a little too well, launching a russet potato clean through their kitchen window. Work would have to wait. International relations, even on a neighborhood scale, comes first. 69. This employee didn't just feel unwell, he felt historically unwell. After a quick search online, he had self-diagnosed with a rare 18th century ailment known as the vapors, which he claimed made him prone to fainting spells at the sight of spreadsheets. His boss dryly noted that the vapors were also a common symptom of it being a Tuesday. 70. And finally, a transportation issue of singular absurdity. An employee reported he couldn't make it in because his unicycle had a flat tire. The sheer layers of this excuse are a masterpiece. After a long, silent pause, his manager asked the only logical question: "Have you considered a second wheel?" 71. This excuse is a masterwork of deferred responsibility. An employee called in, deadpan, to state that he was waiting for a sign from the universe on whether or not he should come to work. He wasn't sick, he wasn't injured. He was just outsourcing his entire professional life to a random cosmic coincidence. The manager was tempted to send a sign back, in the form of a termination letter delivered by a singing telegram. 72. Sometimes the problem isn't the commute, it's the destination. One worker claimed his entire apartment building had been put under quarantine because of an aggressive bedbug infestation. He wasn't just avoiding work, he was effectively a prisoner in a biological siege where the enemy was microscopic and relentless. He didn't need a day off, he needed a hazmat suit and a flamethrower. 73. Here's a story of culinary ambition meeting harsh reality. An employee, trying to impress their friends, attempted to make a fancy flambe dessert. The result? They'd not only set off every smoke alarm in their building, but had also singed off both of their eyebrows. They couldn't face the office not because of injury, but because they now had the permanently surprised expression of a startled owl. 74. A perfect example of a solution becoming a much bigger problem. To deal with a small mouse, an employee bought a snake. The snake, predictably, escaped into the walls. Now, he couldn't come to work because he was too busy dealing with the consequences of my own terrible, terrible life choices. You can't even argue with that level of self-awareness. 75. An employee called to report a severe case of vertigo. The cause? He'd spent the entire previous night on his kid's new hoverboard, and now the world wouldn't stop spinning. He wasn't just dizzy. He had achieved a state of self-inflicted motion sickness so profound that simply looking at his computer screen would be a monumental challenge. 76. This excuse is a bizarre blend of civic duty and pure chaos. The employee stated he was late because he'd stopped to help a group of nuns who had run out of gas. A heartwarming story until he added the detail that he was now also late because the nuns had insisted on repaying him with an impromptu, hour-long prayer service right there on the side of the highway. 77. Here, we have a case of philosophical paralysis. The employee couldn't come in because he'd spent the morning staring at two identical socks and couldn't decide which one was the left sock and which was the right. This wasn't a wardrobe issue. It was a complete breakdown of fundamental logic. His brain had apparently blue-screened over a simple pair of hosiery. 78. An employee, an avid DIY enthusiast, called to explain he'd accidentally sealed himself inside his own panic room. He'd just finished installing the high-security door and, in a moment of pride, closed it to test the lock. From the inside. He was now safer than any human on the planet, and also completely unable to get to his 9 a.m. status meeting. 79. Some allergies are physical, others are spiritual. One employee said their body had developed an intuitive rejection of beige environments. Since the entire office looked like a depressed filing cabinet, the manager had no choice but to excuse them for medical feng shui reasons. 80. An excuse born from a deep misunderstanding of wildlife. The employee needed the day off because he was morally obligated to stay home and teach a baby bird he'd found how to fly. He was reportedly standing on his roof, flapping his own arms for encouragement. It was less St. Francis of Assisi and more a man about to learn a very hard lesson about gravity. 81. You know you have a special kind of employee when they call you from a tree. Not because they're a lumberjack, but because they're hiding from a pack of what they described as surprisingly well-organized feral cats. This wasn't just a stray animal problem. It was a tactical siege orchestrated by a feline militia. 82. An employee called in with a vocal injury that was uniquely modern. They had spent the entire weekend at a gaming convention and had screamed so much trash talk at their opponents that they had completely lost their voice. They weren't sick. They were a casualty of competitive electronic sportsmanship. 83. This is a story of profound miscalculation. An employee reported he couldn't get out of his own driveway, not because of snow or a broken-down car, but because he had ordered a bulk supply of bubble wrap online, and the delivery truck had deposited a literal mountain of it, blocking his entire property. He was a prisoner in a fortress of his own compulsive shopping habits. 84. An employee, an aspiring magician, called to report a work-from-home incident. While practicing a new trick, he had accidentally handcuffed himself to his own refrigerator. He couldn't find the key, and now his professional life was on hold until he could figure out how to escape his own kitchen appliance. 85. And finally, an excuse that is both pathetic and strangely poetic. The employee called to say he was emotionally devastated after his fantasy football team had a particularly bad week. It wasn't just a loss. He spoke of it with the gravity of a national tragedy. His imaginary quarterback had let him down, and now the entire company would have to suffer the consequences. 86. Here's an excuse that walks the fine line between genius and insanity. The employee couldn't come in because they were auditioning for a reality show. Which one? They wouldn't say, claiming it was under a strict non-disclosure agreement. It's the perfect, unverifiable excuse. They returned the next day looking dejected, mumbling, "They just didn't see my star potential, and you're not allowed to question it." 87. An employee needed a mental health day after their 6-year-old made a macaroni family portrait, where the dad figure was just 3 sad noodles and no glitter. He says that's how he sees me. That's not just time off. That's emotional reconstruction leave. 88. This is what happens when you take office wellness trends too literally. An employee called in, claiming he couldn't leave his house because he'd lost his emotional support rock. He wasn't joking. He described it as a particularly smooth, calming granite, and insisted he was paralyzed with anxiety until it was found. His productivity was now hostage to a missing piece of geology. 89. A tale of culinary exploration gone terribly wrong. An employee, trying a new recipe, had confused cayenne pepper with paprika. He hadn't just made a spicy dinner. He had created a dish so volcanically hot it had, in his words, scared his own taste buds into hiding. He couldn't come to work because his mouth had apparently filed for witness protection. 90. Here's a beautiful example of someone who is technically telling the truth. "I can't come in today because of a transportation issue." A classic professional excuse. The manager asked for details. The employee sighed and admitted, "My car's fine. I just forgot where I parked it, somewhere in the city." He wasn't absent. He was on an urban safari for a 4-door sedan. 91. This one is a cry for help disguised as a maintenance issue. An employee claimed their bathtub was overflowing with their own tears after their favorite sports team lost a championship game. He wasn't just sad. He had achieved a level of sports-related grief so powerful it was causing property damage. Forget bereavement leave. This guy needs flood insurance. 92. An employee, an avid historical reenactor, called in to report an injury. During a mock Civil War battle over the weekend, he had been overcome by the sheer authenticity of the moment and had fainted dramatically on the battlefield. The problem? He was still wearing his full wool uniform and refused to break character by taking it off. 93. A story of misplaced faith in technology. The employee's smart speaker had, for some unknown reason, set 300 alarms for 3 a.m. He had spent the entire night playing a frantic game of verbal whack-a-mole with his own home assistant and was now too sleep-deprived to function. His house wasn't just smart, it was a malicious, sleep-stealing genius. 94. This excuse is a pure, unadulterated power move. An employee simply stated, "I used up all of my sick days, so I'm calling in dead for the next 2. There was a long silence on the other end of the line before the manager, unsure of company protocol for temporary resurrections, just quietly approved the absence. 95. A beautiful example of someone creating their own problems. An employee had to stay home because he was trapped by his own success. He had won a lifetime supply of frozen pizzas in a contest, and the delivery had completely blocked his driveway and front door. He was now the king of a cardboard and pepperoni fortress, unable to escape his own prize. 96. This isn't just an excuse. It's a declaration of war on fashion. An employee claimed they couldn't come to work because their brand new skinny jeans were so tight, they had cut off circulation to their legs. They were effectively being held hostage by their own trousers. It's a cautionary tale for anyone trying to fit into clothes they owned a decade ago. 97. Here, the employee became a victim of their own hobby. An amateur taxidermist by night, he had to call in because he'd accidentally stuffed his own work uniform instead of the squirrel he was working on. The image of a perfectly starched company polo shirt, filled with cotton batting and sporting glass eyes, is one that no manager is prepared for. 98. This is a story about the dark side of ambition. An employee, after watching one too many motivational videos, tried to seize the day by leaping out of bed with newfound vigor. The result? He'd misjudged the distance and face-planted directly into his dresser. His day was seized, all right, by a concussion and a profound sense of irony. 99. A pet-related excuse so bizarre it transcends logic. The employee's dog had eaten his dentures. Not his homework, not his shoes. His teeth. He was now unable to speak clearly, eat solid food, or face his coworkers without looking like a friendly grandpa from a cartoon. 100. An employee called in, sounding genuinely distressed. "My new neighbors," he whispered, "are a nudist colony, and it's their annual welcome BBQ." He wasn't sick, he wasn't injured. He was just suffering from a level of secondhand awkwardness so extreme that leaving his house felt like walking onto the set of a very strange, very European art film. 101. And finally, the undisputed champion of excuses. An employee called his boss and, with a perfectly straight face, said, "I am on my way to work, but I'm going to be late because I'm currently being chased by a herd of angry goats." There was a pause. Then, from the background of the call, the manager could clearly hear the frantic bleating of multiple very angry goats. You just hang up the phone, walk over to HR, and approve all future absences from this employee. No questions asked. But here's the question for you, boss. An employee calls with an excuse so creative, so outrageously brilliant, that it belongs in the Louvre of lies. You know it's fake, but it's magnificent. Do you fire them on the spot? Or do you give them a raise just for making your day? Drop your verdict in the comments and don't hold back. If this glorious gallery of human chaos made you feel just a little better about your own life choices, smash that like button and subscribe. Trust me, the world isn't getting any less weird. And neither are we.